Okay, got that set up. My name's JJ. I'm from North Carolina State University, and what I wanted to share today is about the way I gamified a class that I taught last fall. It was an Introduction to Science, Technology, and Society course, and we had a lot of freedom in how we set up that class. And so one of the things I wanted to do from the outset was gamify it. There's been a lot of discussion of gamification in education at the high school level and some at the middle school level, but I wasn't able to find very much literature on gamification at the higher education level. So a lot of that can be ported. Some of it can go directly from the same types of things they do in, say, high school to college, but there are some differences as well, and some things that maybe you can do at college that you wouldn't be able to do at lower levels. And so I was interested in exploring how that worked. The first thing that I want to note, especially since I'm on this panel about games, is that gamification is slightly different than gaming or playing games, and sometimes those are conflated. So gamification is the use of game thinking and game mechanics in a non-game context in order to engage users and solve problems. So in this class that I taught, we weren't actually playing games, but I used the game mechanics, things that happen in games like points and characters and things that we'll talk about, to apply those to the mechanics of the course. And so what I plan to do is walk through a couple of the ways that I applied those game mechanics to this course. First thing, a little bit more about the course. It was, again, an introduction course, and there were 4 main course objectives, and these are standard for everyone that teaches this course. The first was to understand science as a social activity, to consider how interactions between people, institutions, and material structures shape what we mean by both science and technology, to pursue a critical view of scientific knowledge formation and technological innovation, and to articulate important differences between science and technology, and to explore the relationship between them through specific case studies. And finally, to discuss a myriad of social impacts of new technologies and consider the ethics of technical and scientific practice. So maybe we can keep those in mind as we think about the elements of gamification I implemented in an attempt to help bolster these course objectives. So actually, the idea for this started because I was going to be out of town for the first day of class. I was doing a study abroad in the Netherlands. I wouldn't be back until after the first day. And so I was brainstorming what I could do with my students on that first day. And so I came up with starting the narrative for the gamified class. It was something that they'd be able to do online. All of our classes have a blended learning environment with Moodle. And so I posted the beginning portion of this course on Moodle, and what I created was a narrative called The Tattered Book, and I tried to tie that into some things that were happening on campus. We had just built a brand new state-of-the-art Hunt library on our Centennial campus, and it was going to share with the main library on the main campus. And so they were moving many of the books from the older library to the new library, and so I tied into that move and created this narrative that an old book had been discovered that wasn't actually logged in the library. It's one of Aristotle's books, and they found an untranslated passage in it that didn't seem to be in any of his other works. And so their goal was to translate this passage for the first day of class. And they could use any resources they wanted. They could work together on Moodle, but we posted the passage, and they had to work through it. So this was the first thing that they saw. And this was all they saw, except they also got this. So a few of them went through it pretty quickly and helped the others, but many of them were a little lost just seeing this. Basically, this is a puzzle that gets put together, and it has a clue that you can decode. And once you have done all that, it leads you to a YouTube video. There's a URL embedded in the puzzle once it's put together, and that continues the story. There's several logic puzzles. You have to click through different YouTube videos. So it was a pretty elaborate puzzle to kick off the class and to start the narrative for this. And once they solved the puzzle, they got a code that actually opened up the quests for the rest of the course. So they had to put in that code into Moodle to even access anything else in the course. So it was kind of a gate to the rest of the course material. So some of the other game mechanics that were included. Let's start with the leaderboard. This proved to be one of the more effective game components that was included. What I had them do was create an alias with any type of avatar that they wanted, and this was posted on only our Moodle. So everybody in the class could see it, but no one outside of the class could see it. When I first started trying to think how to do this, of course, there was a FERPA concern, right? How could I make sure it wasn't sharing any particular person's grade information? And actually, a Twitter chat with a group that does gamification for high school solved this pretty easily. It was obvious once I saw it, but when I was trying to figure it out, it was a little hard. You just give them aliases that only they know. And of course, the question is, well, couldn't they tell someone else who they are? And the answer is yes, of course they could, but they could also tell anyone else what their grade is if they chose to do that. But if they don't choose to do that, this is a fairly anonymous way to protect their grades. The other thing I'll point out, if you can see, this was at the end of the class in the top rankings. This course ended up graded on a scale of 0 to 1,000, with 1,000 points being an A+, and everyone on this view, which is somewhere just over 10 out of a class of 24, scored actually over 1,000 points, and ended up being the most A+s I've ever given out in about 10 years of teaching now. So I was very excited to see that, and I thought that was a good outcome of the gamification process, was that people actually did even more work than I think they normally would have in this class for the competitive nature of wanting to get to the top of the leaderboard. And there did seem to be, from week to week, this competition of what can I turn in this week to either make sure I rise in the ranks or stay at the top if they were there. So that worked in just the way we would hope gamification would, in motivating the students to participate in the week-to-week assignments and those bigger projects and quests that I'll talk about in a minute.
Now, did you pick the names, or did they pick?
That was completely up to them. So that was one of their first assignments, was to submit.
Someone picked John Tukey?
Yes.
I'm surprised they know who that is. Okay.
It was mostly engineers,
Okay.
if that makes a difference.
He's the guy who invented the name software and hardware.
Mm-hmm. Another game mechanic that I used was just the language of games. And this idea I actually got from my wife. She worked with college students who were at risk of flunking out. She got them in the last semester where if they didn't pull up their grades, they were going to be booted from the university. And one of the things that she really emphasized was the importance of language in dealing with anxiety. So particularly for this student population, but perhaps for all students, it could be generalized, things like tests and exams and assignments are words that just make us stress. Maybe you're just feeling stressed from hearing me saying them right now. No tests today, don't worry. She called all of her tests marshmallows, which is really silly, and it means nothing, but it relieved anxiety. All right, everybody, we're having our marshmallow today. Oh, great, that sounds wonderful, right? So similarly, with gamification, I used, instead of like assignments or finals or exams, I had quests, I had challenges, I had battles, I had combats, I had these types of things. So the main component was the quests, which I'll get into, and then different battles to tie into the readings. A little bit about the quests. My main quest was a critical making project to invent a new technology. And I actually adapted this from an assignment one of my previous cohort members that had already graduated had done in this class. His assignment, David Gruber, he had them only do like a patent application for new technology. But I pushed this to be a little more hands-on and to use some critical making tools. So they use things like 3D printing, microcontrollers, augmented reality, things like that to actually create the technologies that they were brainstorming. And I'm not going to go too in-depth on that, but if you are interested, I have a poster session this evening about the critical making aspect. But that's a little separate from the gamified part of this presentation. So again, some of the language: the quest, battle, combat. A little closer look at how I did the points. It really didn't stray that far from a typical course that might do a 0 to 1,000 point scale. But instead of calling it grades and points, I called it XP for experience points, right? Again, that's part of that language. But the other key for this was that grades were strictly cumulative. So I was trying to take away the narrative that you could lose points on something, because I'm so fed up with hearing that in the class. Oh, I lost this many points. No, everything in this class, you gained points. You never lost points. And if they didn't like the amount of points they got for something, they could do something else, or they could redo that assignment. That was an option for all of these. And so 1,000 points, well, actually 980 to 1,000 points was an A+. But there were approximately 1,600 points available in the class total. So that was the total amount they could do based on what was available. I think in the previous screen we saw 1,280, I think, was the highest someone got. They did a lot of work. I mean, they really did to get that many points. I felt if they got 1,000, they were going to really be pushing themselves. I tried to structure it that way. So I was really happy with what they chose to do and how much effort that they put into these assignments. One difficulty I ran into, and am still trying to work through how to best do it, was to make sure that there were certain assignments that would get done. Because for the most part, I wanted it to be optional. If they wanted to do this, and that was their interest, I wanted them to pursue that. But reading the textbook and being able to participate in class discussions was something that I did want to prioritize as an instructor to help meet some of those course objectives. So for that reason, I required that a certain amount of XP be from those particular assignments. And that was a little more restrictive than I hoped to be in theory. But in practice, that was the best solution I came up with. And if anybody does have other ideas about how to implement that, I'd certainly be interested in hearing them, because that's not something I've solved yet. So here's a little more about one of the quests. Again, this was not unlocked until they completed the opening puzzle. And then once that puzzle was opened, the first thing they get are the first two elements on this screen. So what is 3D printing, and think, 3D printing research. And with Moodle, this is the instructor view. So it tells me, right, this is completely hidden, not available until they complete a certain activity, which is one of the nice things about Moodle that really facilitated this gamification. You could hide certain assignments and components that weren't available until an activity was completed, or perhaps until they got a certain amount of points on an activity. Those types of things could be done. So the quest was broken up into different stages. The first stage was where I had them research the technology that they were interested in. So 3D printing was one they could choose. They didn't have to do this one. There was the microcontrollers, there was augmented reality, and there was also a science communication quest. So they picked the one they wanted, they watched the introduction video, and then I had them do research and contribute that to a class wiki on that particular topic. From there, the getting warmed up phase, I asked them to look at a technology that had already been created. So maybe there's a tutorial online, or maybe an instruction set that they could follow, and just recreate something that had already been done. And this was their chance to have hands-on practice with the technology, to play with it. Because for many of them, these were technologies they hadn't used before. There were a few that had some previous experience, but for the most part, none of them did. After that, I had them plan their victory, I called it, and that was basically the core of the assignment from what I adapted it for. They created what very much looked like a patent application. It was based on the same process one would go through for that, a little bit simplified for the course, but they had to give similar inventions. They had to talk about what theirs would do, how it would be different, and give some kind of sketch or mock-up of what they were going to be doing. And then finally, they needed to actually create this, and we had 2 days a month where we met at the library and all worked together as a group, and there was actually a librarian on hand to help with any problems that came up, or troubleshooting, or the technical aspects, in addition to what I could offer. And that actually tended to go very well. A lot of work was achieved during those sessions. Then, once they submitted their project, they were awarded a badge on the Moodle site. Again, this just used a simple unlocking feature. Once they submitted and it was marked complete by me, then this badge was unlocked. And this is a very simple use of badging, and I wasn't sure how it would go, but I actually saw some motivation generated from this. So for example, I only required that one group member submit their material, but almost all of the groups, every single group member submitted it so that they could earn that badge. They were excited for that badge. And this would actually be something that I would look into expanding on if I were to teach this course again like this. Moodle itself has some more advanced badging technology now. This wasn't available when I did this course. I also think it would be probably best to tie into some of the open source badging sites so that these could be ported beyond Moodle in the university even. So that is something I'd really be interested in expanding in that sense. A couple of the challenges. I've mentioned a few as we've gone along. One of the biggest struggles for me that I think impacted the students was maintaining that opening narrative of the tattered book puzzle. I did, in my research, run across the idea that it was important to have the entire narrative planned out ahead of time. I wasn't able to plan out the entire semesters, and my hope was that I'd be able to keep going with it as the semester went based on what was happening in the class. But I found that it was hard to keep that going in the heat of a semester, so to speak. And that also, I noticed the student interest in the narrative waning. Now, that might have been tied to my responsibility in keeping that narrative going too. But that was certainly one of the biggest challenges. So were I to do this again, or if any of you would consider it, I would really emphasize planning the whole story ahead of time, no matter what. I think that's very important. And that might include planning conditionals, right? So planning, well, I'll use this piece of the narrative if this happens. And maybe if something different happens, you use a different narrative. But I think planning in that way would greatly facilitate this process. The other obstacle that I ran into that I wasn't expecting was student expectations, and specifically about their grades. I mentioned these were engineering students. NCSU is a pretty competitive college. I think the admission rate is somewhere around 20 to 30%. The average GPA is 4.0. So these are students who are very concerned that entering high school GPA 4.0. Students who are very concerned about their grades, and so that's the population I was dealing with. So maybe I should have expected that, but there was a great concern about how are these XP going to translate to my final grade, and this is something we've talked about at the Duke PhD lab. How do we manage expectations for grades when really that's not what we want our students to care about? We only care what they learn. So that was a challenge, trying to explain how they could earn the XP that they wanted. So midway through the semester, based on the questions that I got, I introduced this form that I didn't have at the beginning, and I think this went a long way towards mitigating those concerns. So basically, I created something that they could say, this was for them, I looked at them, but what grade do they want from the course? So if they want a B or a C, great. If they want an A, okay, great. Then, based on the chart that was in the syllabus, how many points did they need in order to get that grade? And then on here, I put all of the possible tasks or assignments, battles, quests, right, that's the language, that they could complete to earn points. And so based on the grade they wanted, they could figure out what they wanted to do in the course to earn that grade. And the caveat was they don't necessarily get full points just for completing something, right? There is still points assigned like there would be on an assignment. So it was a little fuzzy, but this gave a lot better clarification of how they could get the grade that they needed for the course. Because ultimately we are still working within an institution that assigns grades and is important to them. So this was kind of the meeting them halfway on that aspect of it. Briefly, I want to show you a few of the results of the class. We'll just look at what they came up with as part of the process. One group completed what they called Bud's Buddy. It was a 3D printed headphone holder for their cell phone. So they created it specifically for their version of the cell phone. You put your phone in it, and the headphones embed in the case so that it can slide easily into your pocket without being bulky with the headphones. Each group, in addition to creating their project, created a multimodal presentation of their project that we showed each other at the end of the semester. So these are a screenshot of their multimodal presentations. Okay, another group created a mind-controlled robot car. This is one of the ones, we talked a lot about failure in this course also as part of gamification. This one didn't actually get completed. They were able to get the mind control, the mind reader working, and they were able to attach the Arduino to the car and get that working, but they had trouble actually getting the mind reader connected to the Arduino. They were using a blue Smurf, was the name of it, that's supposed to connect it, and it was having hardware problems. But they still made a lot of progress. They did some 3D printing to attach the Arduino to the car itself, and learned all about the brainwave reading device. So still a lot happened there. Another group used a Kinect to do augmented reality music creation. And so each square, when they moved, wherever they moved to, would create a different sound. And this was based on similar projects like this, but they used some MIDI software to be able to create this project. And the next one was a robotic hand. They planned to make an entire hand. You may have seen in the news some of the ones that are based on movement and for hands for prostheses. They wanted to create one that was ultimately Arduino controlled. They didn't complete the final hand, but they did get a working prototype of a 3D printed micro-controlled finger, and that finger worked. And so they were able to get that going by the end of the semester. Their biggest limitation was the quality of the 3D printers we had available on campus. We have pretty good ones, but there are better ones available that we didn't have access to. So that was one limitation there. Arguably the most complete and successful project was the Force Mouse. The idea here was to create a mouse that was not your traditional use on a surface or something like that. And they were especially thinking of people who travel a lot and are maybe on airplanes and need that space. And so what they created was they 3D printed the outside of the mouse and then also created the Arduino circuitry to run this mouse. And it's a ball that you hold, and as you move it, it moves the mouse, and there's also buttons on it. So that was really a pretty amazing project that they later presented at the STS symposium that we had on campus the following semester. And they're actually working on the patent process as we speak now to try to get this project patented. So in conclusion, walked through some of the gamification mechanics and then the results that led to. Very happy with the way gamification worked. I learned a lot along the way, have thought about some things that didn't work, things I might do differently, but it's definitely something that I think has a lot of potential in higher education. So, thank you.
Yeah. Did you keep track of how many hours you put into developing the class and how many hours your students who actually got A's put in? Because it, just looking at it, it seems like it would be a big burden, relative to other classes. It would be a fairly large burden, to teach and a fairly large burden to take.
I didn't keep track. I can maybe talk about some estimates. For me, a lot of the work was done before the class started. During the class, most of the time was spent on grading. That would have been spent grading any type of assignment. So I don't feel that I put in more time than I put into a normal course, or at least not much more time. The most time I spent was on brainstorming. I spent more time on brainstorming than actually creating or grading anything, and thinking about how this would work. And so a lot of that was, I'd be in the shower and have an idea, right? That's how those things go. But actually creating it, setting up the Moodle, and having the assignments there, for me, did not take more time than normal. For the students, of course, I got some rumbles that for an introduction level class, this was more work than normal. But at least I get that in every class I teach. So I don't know if that's me or just everybody gets that from all students. I don't know. But one of the things I did to try to mitigate that was the in-class workshop session. So time that we had in class, we spent working on these projects. And I believe that helped some on that part, because this work wasn't all done outside of class, at least. So we had these workshops as part of class. Does that, do you think, answer your question? Okay. Sure.
I'm still, the tattered book narrative.
Sure.
Okay, so that, I saw it went down to 10 points.
Mhm.
That was like very low. Now, so what is the relationship of that to the 4 quests?
That they had to complete that to unlock the quests.
Oh,
So they couldn't even do the quests until they completed the opening puzzle.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you were carrying that through the semester?
The story I was attempting to carry through the semester. So I didn't go into great depths about what the story was, but the idea was Aristotle was writing about the importance of invention and tying into science and technology into the course objectives. I tried to tie that into, and so it was important to understand the process of invention was kind of the key, and so that was the main story. And so they had to move into these quests as part of understanding that process. And so that was what we attempted to carry through the semester, was that the idea behind the mission of that initial story. Yeah.
I was wondering, in terms of unlocking the quest, because I'm interested in gamifying classes at university level as well.
Yeah.
So with Moodle, which I'm not as familiar with,
Sure.
does it auto unlock, like do they complete it and then you grade it, say it's okay and they get to move on, or does it auto unlock after they say they completed it and then you sort of follow up?
Yeah, so you can actually choose to do it either way,
Okay.
depending on how it's set up. Most of mine, it was they submitted something and could move on, and then I'd assign points later.
Okay.
But you can certainly set it up so that you have to kind of be the gatekeeper with that, so that if they have to get a certain number of points or you have to approve it, whatever would work best for you would work in
Okay.
Moodle. Yeah.
One
Yeah.
more question.
So I had a follow-up to that.
Okay.
With unlocking, do you have bottlenecks in the class? Or like if people choose to do an assignment or choose not to, how do you cover that?
Yeah, so the biggest bottleneck was with that initial unlocking of the puzzle. There were students being very helpful in the forum on the course, and so if you read the forum, you were going to be able to unlock the puzzle. There was enough there that was pretty easy. Despite that, I did have students who took several weeks to get that unlocked and fell a little behind in the class because of that. But these were also students who weren't coming to class the first few weeks. They came maybe one of the 7 first days of class, right? So there's definitely a concern there. But everyone who showed up to class consistently was able to move past that bottleneck for me. Not to say that we shouldn't care about those people who were not, but yeah, that would perhaps be something to think through is for those people who aren't going to be as involved, how to prevent that bottleneck. And is something I think would be important to think through more.
Well, it's